One of the reasons burnout is so sneaky is because we're constantly borrowing from tomorrow to get through today. Where we're just, yeah, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. And then suddenly the body says, no, no more.
Welcome, friends. In this episode of Insights at the Edge, my guest is Zabie Yamasaki. I have the opportunity to call her Zabi, and you can call her Zabi too. Zabi is the founder of Transcending Trauma Through Yoga, which is an organization that offers trauma-informed yoga to survivors, consultations and workshops for universities and trauma agencies, and trainings for healing professionals. Her yoga as healing curriculum, get this, is now being implemented at over 50 college campuses, including Stanford, Yale, through the University of California campuses, and at Johns Hopkins University, just to name some of the universities where her yoga as healing curriculum is now offered. She's the author of several books on trauma-informed yoga, and Zabi has a new book with Sounds True. It's called Protect Your Energy, a gentle guide to nurture your nervous system, cultivate rest, and honor your needs. This book, dare I say it, is a co-regulation partner that you can use. That's what it's designed for. It's a co-regulation guidebook that we need right now in our times. Zabi, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Tami, for that beautiful, warm welcome. It is such an honor to be with you and share space with you today.
You poured so much love into the book, so much care for people. I'd love to know a little bit, as you were writing the book, what were you accessing inside yourself that you were making available for others? How would you describe that process?
Wow, this is such a beautiful question. And, I love kind of reflecting on the writing process now that I can kind of step away from it. And, I actually, during the manuscript process, I had this moment, and I must have had a really distressed look on my face as I was sort of plugging away at my laptop because my son came over, he's 8, and he closes my laptop and he puts his little hands on my face and he says, "It's okay, mama, it doesn't have to be perfect." And it was just such a reminder to me as I was writing the book that I was also trying to practice what I was preaching. And I feel like there are so many amazing books out there that approach healing and nervous system physiology and trauma from this very cognitive lens. But I wanted this book to feel like a co-regulator, that you could open the book and feel that sense of healing as you're reading it. And it's deeply personal for me because in my own journey of trauma healing, I couldn't quite find a resource like this. I felt like I had enough information. Sometimes we have too much information, instead of trusting our embodied wisdom and actually integrating what we already know. And so, as I was writing this book, I really wanted it to be a soft place to land. I wanted it to be a place where people could feel that sense of relief. And so, I really tried to tap into that within my own physiology and trust that the messages were going to come out and land in exactly the way that they were designed to.
And as a way for our listeners to also get to know you more, talk a little bit about your own journey to discovering nervous system regulation. I read towards the beginning of the book, you wrote that at the height of the pandemic, while working full time, you ended up in the emergency room after a series of rolling panic attacks. And I was like, okay, Zabi knows this from the inside out. How did you recover from being in such a dysregulated state that you had a series of rolling panic attacks
Yeah.
that took you into the ER to be able to sit down and write a book like this?
Oh gosh, it's been such a journey. I was actually talking about this yesterday. I as I reflect on my own journey of living in survival mode for so long, there was so many years where I spent having a difficult time deciphering the difference between safety and danger. And when you sort of live in that prolonged state of hypervigilance, it can really cloud your relationship with rest. And so for me, rest never actually felt restorative. It felt more like collapse, just sort of something that I would do at the end of the day instead of integrating it into my days in a way that was intentional and actually felt restorative. And I learned through those years of disconnection from myself that my perfectionist tendencies to overwork and sort of numb myself from having to feel anything difficult or to prepare tediously and meticulously for every single work project so I would do it perfect or so I wouldn't mess up or to view everything in my life through the lens of urgency. These were all trauma responses that deserved so much healing and so much care. And I write about this in the book that we're all worthy of honoring all of the ways that our body has supported our survival without shame or without stigma, right? Because sometimes we dissociate as a way to protect ourselves because what our nervous system is currently managing in this season of life is too much. We might be overtaxed, and as a result, our body is doing the best that it can with the resources that it has available. And I remember a dear friend of mine texting me one day, and she wrote, Zabi, you don't have to just survive anymore. You can breathe and choose to live. And you know how sometimes you read something and words just have this way of rearranging your insides and just kind of landing on your physiology in a way that you need in that single moment. And so the recovery wasn't quick. It was the small digestible process of just continuing to show up for myself, recognizing that I just couldn't continue in the way that I was, that my husband had a recent cancer diagnosis. We were in the thick of the pandemic. I was writing my first book and also working at UCLA and trying to run my business, and that there had to be a more soul nourishing way to exist in the world. And so began the journey of protecting your energy.
I think that during the pandemic, then post-pandemic,
Mm.
many people discovered that their nervous systems were somehow stuck in some pattern of freak out, let's just say, whether they were hypervigilant in the way you described or whether people felt shut down. And now post-pandemic, finding a new sense of balance for many people, I think, still seems out of reach. It's not there. With everything that's happening in the world, the level and speed of change that we're experiencing, there's this sense almost like the inner metronome of the nervous system, if I could use that metaphor for a moment, is like stuck. It's either, we're stuck in a dorsal shutdown, we're stuck in a hyper vigilant freak out. How do you move out of that stuck place? Speak directly to that person who's like, look, I hear what you're saying. I do things every day, but I still keep going back to this stuck place.
Yes. Honestly, Tammy, I feel like so much of healing the nervous system is unpacking our relationship to urgency. And I was actually giving a workshop to a group of educators recently, and one of the teachers raised her hand, and I could see the tears starting to well up in her eyes. And she goes, Zabi, I feel like I'm doing all of the things. I'm meditating, I'm exercising, I'm eating healthy, I'm in therapy, I'm taking my kids on adventures on the weekends. I'm. And I had to pause with her for a moment and with so much love and compassion, remind her that sometimes what the nervous system needs is less. And we have this tendency as humans to kind of replicate the frenetic pace and the chaos of our lives in our self-care, right? So now the way that we take care of ourselves is starting to become another overwhelming thing on our list. And so I would say to that person, the power of releasing the pressure, of recognizing the difference between managing your energy versus managing your time. Because we might have time on our schedule to add in the extra activity for our kids, to go to the market, to do the thing for a friend. But do we have capacity? And I think we've been so programmed to consistently overriding the cues of our nervous system to the degree where we're even ignoring our basic needs. Like going to the bathroom when we need to go to the bathroom, eating when we're hungry, drinking water when we need to drink water, getting back to the basics. And, just recognizing the toll that it takes to always hold the default nervous system in the room and all that goes into that process of intention and care.
Now, this is something that you could explain to people, this notion of holding the default nervous system in the room. I was thinking about how for parents, I mean, that's what parents do, right? You hold the default nervous system for your kids. Educators do this, yoga teachers, healing professionals, leaders of all kinds. You're saying to become aware of that and notice what it asks of you?
100% Tammy. And, for those of you, if this is a new term for you, always holding the default nervous system in the room, I don't think we talk nearly enough about the incredible strength and toll that takes. And when I say that, what I mean is the pressure to always be resourced, regulated, resilient in order to show up and hold space for others. And oftentimes we are the emotional regulator in the room. So others are oftentimes borrowing from our nervous system to support their own. And, Maya Angelou's words continue to be an anchor for me. Her words, your energy introduces you before you even speak. Your energy
This
introduces you before you even speak.
I was introduced to you through the energy of your book, which spoke volumes to me about your love, really, Zabi, which I keep coming back to because I can feel it, your care for people. Okay, this notion of becoming aware of our urgency. One of the things you write about in Protect Your Energy is a phrase like, I'm just going to go take a quick shower. I'm going to get a quick bite to eat. And I started realizing how I talk to myself that way all the time. And I also say it out loud to my wife. I'm just going to go, why am I taking a quick shower? Why don't I take a luxuriously long, beautiful, restful, peaceful shower. Okay, you were raised by immigrant parents, and I wonder how much for those of us who come from family lines of immigrants, there's this notion of, you got to get it together for your survival now. That urgency is programmed into us, don't you think?
1000%. I mean, as a daughter of immigrants, I never saw my parents rest. I never saw them accept help. Everything was about we just have to work so hard. We have to be the best. This is how we prove that we are worthy and enough. And our worth is tied to our productivity in so many ways. And so it's actually really healing now. My father is in his 80s. He and my mom grew up in India, and they came here after he finished pharmacy school, and he opened up a pharmacy in California. And so I try to be really intentional about taking a few months of a sabbatical every year. And he just sort of looks at me and he's like, "What do you do on a sabbatical?" Like it's such a foreign concept to him because that was just not part of the program. And so I think it's actually leads to these really generational healing conversations that he can see me resting and know that I can still thrive as a mother and as a healing professional, that the two aren't mutually exclusive. So yeah, there's so much to say there about just being a daughter of immigrants and how it has kind of shaped my own work ethic and how I'm kind of carving a new path for myself.
Okay, I'm going to ask you just a very direct question, Zabi. Do you feel that you have broken the pattern in your own life of always being an urgent, all-accomplishing person? Because you've accomplished a whole lot.
Yeah.
Have you really broken that pattern as like a drive every day, I have to do it? Here you are, you're taking sabbaticals. I mean, is that something now that's in your past, or are you working through it now?
Oh, I am constantly a work in progress. I wouldn't say that there is ever a finish line. And I actually talk about this in the book, this concept of celebrating our middles. And what I mean when I say that is I feel like in our healing journey, we oftentimes wait until we've reached the arbitrary finish line, or things are tied up in a pretty bow, or there's some big announcement at the end. But every day living and healing is something to celebrate. And too often we save celebration until we reach these moments of completion. But oftentimes we need the most support when we are in the thick of our rebuilding process. So for me, last year, I was in the throes of a really challenging fertility journey. I have had to fight really hard to build my family. I had a third trimester loss before I had my son Hudson, who's now 8, and then my daughter Leilani, who was born last year. It was a long IVF journey to getting to her. And there is some solace that I find when I remember the temporary nature of every challenging season that we're in. And when I was in that season, I knew that my capacity was going to look different, that it wasn't going to be this shiny, thriving, overachieving Zabi while I was going through heartbreak and constant appointments and injections and unknowns. And so I think that I am certainly always a work in progress. And when I come back to these tools, I remember that one of the most beautiful, there's this quote by Nakia Homer that I share in the book. One of the most beautiful things about who you are right now is all of the versions of you that kept going so you could get here. And I think when we remember that there are many different versions of us that are present with us in the room, I actually like to bring that analogy in when I'm teaching yoga classes. And when I kind of scan the nervous systems in the space, you see the tears welling up. You see the kind of collective exhale of just recognizing the immensity of all that we hold as humans, and that it's actually really beautiful to know that we can hold the grief and the joy at the same time.
Now, you mentioned when you're teaching yoga, and when I introduced you, Zabi, I said that your area of specialization is trauma-informed yoga. And I can imagine someone thinking, okay, how is that different
Mm.
than perhaps the yoga I've done or am currently doing? What makes a certain type of yoga trauma-informed?
Yes. So trauma informed yoga is essentially an evidence based healing modality. It's an empowering yoga practice that prioritizes the lived experience and healing of each and every human. So, safety, trust, choice, and agency are some of the core components that guide the practice. So, one of the first things I might say in a trauma informed yoga class is if you wanted to find one shape and stay there for the entire practice, that would be amazing and supported. This is your body, your practice, and always your choice. The choices that you make with your body are always celebrated in this space. And it's actually really funny. One of the first places that I started teaching trauma informed yoga was actually at a CrossFit gym. And
Hmm.
which is kind of ironic in some ways. And I think at first, when I walked into that space with all of these really buff humans, they're like, "Who is this yogi and why is she having us be in our feelings and giving us lots of choices?" But week after week, you really started to see those emotional layers come down, the armor come down. I witness people who typically push themselves to the very edge, give themselves permission to rest and to feel. And it was a reminder to me that the practice of tenderness is needed everywhere. It's very universal. And at the end, the manager of that CrossFit gym was like, "Zabi, now no one wants to come to their workouts and everyone wants to come to your yoga class." And so, yes, when we're teaching from a trauma-informed lens, we're recognizing that when we're teaching yoga, there are also trauma survivors in this space. So we are mindful of offering breath work from a trauma sensitive lens, of really recognizing the safety of the physicality of the space, of being prepared to support students who might be triggered. I mean, there's just so much love and intention that goes into the space holding.
The final section of Protect Your Energy is a nervous system self-care toolkit, if you will, and you include micro practices, but also this whole section on shapes of rest. I'd never heard that phrase before. I thought it was beautiful, and the way you introduce different shapes, different ways we can hold our body and breathe and be with ourselves. Maybe give an example of one of your favorite shapes of rest so people can get a sense of what we're talking about.
I love this question. Oh, there's so many, but I would say supported bridge tends to be a favorite for me, as well as legs up the wall. But I'll start with supported bridge, where this is just the act of sliding a block underneath your sacrum or your lower back and inviting your body to melt into the block. And there's something sort of symbolic about this gesture for me of reminding ourselves that we are worthy of the same compassion that we so freely give to others. And there's a message in that section that I really tried to infuse, and that's we don't need to wait, that you are worthy of resting before you are exhausted. And, there's also this idea that sometimes safety can feel like exhaustion because our bodies finally have permission to rest. And so being so gentle and compassionate with yourself, giving yourself the time in the middle of the day to drop into a supported bridge or to bring your legs onto your couch or up the wall, even if it's just 5 minutes in the middle of the day, to kind of break that cycle of urgency. And sometimes when we give ourselves the gift of spaciousness and regulation and rest, that's when some of our best ideas and clarity and wisdom tend to come to the surface. I don't know if you all can relate to this, but do you ever notice how some of your best ideas come to you when you're on a long, sort of leisurely walk, or you're deeply present with a loved one in conversation and just laughing so hard and so tuned in, or taking a long bath? I just think we're so programmed for the constant on the go that it's in these moments of stillness that we can trust that our healing and growth is especially happening in those moments.
And also, just to connect a couple of dots here about the nervous system, when we're born into a situation where we don't feel there is a default nervous system we can lean into that's reliable, maybe because in our early life there was trauma or our parents were just too busy and there we were, there was nothing to hold us. These shapes of rest, they give us the holding, actually. And I wonder if you can speak to that from your own experience.
Yeah. Yes. I That's such a beautiful way to reconceptualize that, Tammy. I just love the idea of the self-holding. In fact, it's actually one of the other shapes in the book is this kind of actual practice of self-holding. And when I think about in those moments when I'm incredibly overwhelmed in my day, actually, one of the first things that I start to do is just put my hands on my face. At first, it's kind of like in a moment of distress, of just like, oh my goodness, I have so much to do. And then I kind of naturally start doing the self massage, the gentle massage to the temples or to the back of the head or the shoulders, and just being aware of how much tension that I'm carrying in that moment. And can I just hold myself in a way to offer myself a little relief? And I think that one of the most powerful practices that we can do is kind of taking these moments to do an embodied check-in with ourself, to offer ourselves these moments of grace and self-compassion and self-love. And I feel like they really have the potential to create some palpable shifts as we move through our days.
Now, Zabi, you work and have worked over the past decade and more with sexual abuse trauma survivors. And I'm wondering if you can address the trauma survivors who are listening to us right now, whatever the cause of the trauma is. And those people who think, this all sounds really good and Zabi seems loving and present, but I still feel like there's something in me that it is not going to shift. It's too wired. It's
Mhm.
too wired into dysregulation.
Mhm. I would say that as we know, healing is not a linear journey. And yes, I'm here and I'm talking about this book and I know that I've built this incredible career that I feel so proud of, but there were so many seasons where I was not recognizable even to myself. And that was because multiple experiences of trauma from being a survivor of sexual trauma to experiencing the loss of my child at 26 weeks into my pregnancy to supporting my husband through his cancer journey. I mean, it has not been an easy life by any means. But the one thing that I have stayed tethered to is my softness and my sensitivity. I used to view those as signs of weakness, and now I actually see them as my greatest strength. And I think when we, as survivors, can continue to be loving and soft with ourselves in a world that gives us a million reasons to harden, I actually think it's one of the most powerful tools in our healing journey. And there's a quote that I want to share with you all from Dr. Tima. It's also in the book. And she shares, "You did all of that with weight on your wings. I can't wait to see you flying free." And I share that with the reminder to find a little bit of compassion and solace in the notion that every challenging season we are in is temporary, and to hold on during the storms, to trust in your softness, to trust in your sensitivity, to know that you are never alone in your healing journey. There is so many people out there who understand what you're going through. And um, I would just say that, that you are so supported and you're so loved, and, I hope that this book brings you a lot of healing in your own process and a lot of tools, in that reminder that you're not alone.
All right. In Protect Your Energy, there were a couple of moments when I sat up straight and wrote note to self. Tammy, take careful note here. So here was one of them. Boundary work is nervous system work.
Mhm.
Boundary work is nervous system work.
Yeah.
Tell me you came to that discovery and what it means to you.
Mm. I love this conversation because, I think we've been taught to oftentimes think about boundaries from this very cognitive lens of, wow, I should have just said no to that. Or why did I take on more? Why did I volunteer at my child's school? Or how did I end up being team mom again? Like we kind of, we're very in our head about it, but we cannot cut ourselves off from the very real and visceral ways our body is constantly communicating to us. So, whether that is that swirling feeling you get in your stomach when somebody texts you who just does not honor or respect your time, or that flesh feeling you get in your face when you know that more boundaries are needed in a certain situation. So I really try to approach boundary setting from this embodied lens, which is really integrating the mind, body, and spirit into the way that we assert and communicate our needs. And oftentimes I am doing that sort of embodied check-in and practicing self-consent before I take on more. And so some that sounds really fancy, right? But sometimes an embodied check-in is something as simple as resting a palm on my heart and a palm on my belly, and just really trying to gain clarity around my capacity. What am I navigating in this season of life? If I do take on this project, what other areas of my life are being neglected? When I envision taking this on, what do I feel in my body? Is it a sense of kind of warmth and excitement, or is it this feeling of just kind of, just depletion and overexertion? Is the compensation I'm receiving to take on this project, does it accurately reflect the amount of work I'm going to be pouring into it? So, just making it a regular practice to check in with ourselves before we just, sometimes as humans, we have this tendency to just say, sure, yeah, I'll do it, before really thinking it through, checking in with our bodies, or just infusing a little more intention and care into that process.
So I love this notion, you describe it as somatic boundaries and doing an embodied check-in. And I think when there's a clear yes and a clear no, it's easy. We know our body when it says no, absolutely. And we know oh my God, yeah. But what about that whole middle area where we're like, well, kind of yeah, but kind of no, but I'm not really getting paid enough, but I really like the people and I kind of want to do it, but that means I'm not going to be there for my, partner's XYZ event. I wonder if I have to talk I mean, it gets complicated in that middle zone. How do you sort that?
That's literally me every week. I I think one thing that I have been doing that has been helping with that sort of middle gray area is asking, does this need to happen now? Or can it wait until I have more capacity? They obviously sometimes there are certain things that, okay, that event is this day, so either I'm going or I'm not, right? So sometimes it has to be, all right, is it a clear yes or a clear no? And maybe I'm in that gray area, but I'm making a decision that is going to serve me and my family in this moment. But when there are other things that we are really excited about, that it's not a clear no, can we kind of space things out a little bit where we might have a little more capacity in a month or so? And that's also kind of another theme I feel like I try to bring into the book, is just this act of margins and buffers and space between things. And we kind of started talking about it a little bit, Tammy, this idea of, we're always so programmed to say things like, I'm just going to go to the bathroom real quick. I'm just going to go to the market real quick. I'm going to squeeze in this workout real quick. We rush even when we don't have to rush because we're so programmed for that. And so my practice lately has actually been, I told my husband the other day, I'm going to go to Trader Joe's real slow. And he's laughing so hard at me. I'm like, I'm going to get my favorite cocoa butter. I'm going to take time picking out all my favorite items. So don't expect me back anytime soon. And just, I know we don't always have the luxury to go slow, but when we can, to get into that practice of just kind of slowing, taking a beat and slowing things down.
Yeah. I like what you're saying about having margins, having rest times, and I very much appreciate that. When it comes to navigating this boundary work, I think some of the challenges, and look, you have a 1-year-old and an 8-year-old and a husband and a business and a very busy life. So you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about, is other people's needs don't necessarily match our nervous system boundaries. So, for example, in my relationship, my partner can be much more like, I often feel like she's so far ahead of me. And I'm like, hello, I need to go a lot slower here. And she's just so far ahead. She's like already in our future life, practically making decisions about things. And I'm like, what? And so when it comes to navigating that with other people,
Yeah.
who are in different timelines. I'm wondering
Mhm.
what you have to share about that.
I love this question because absolutely, Tammy. I mean, in any partnership, it's never going to be 50-50, right? Our capacity looks different each week. And there's a capacity practice I share in the book where we take the time to kind of check in with our partner around where are you at this week? Are you at like a 25%? Are you at a 10%? I'm at more of a 50, 70. I have a little more capacity to give. So let's talk about what that means for us this week. And I think a theme that I'm noticing is coming up in our conversation is intention and care. And it really allows us to build this practice of care and kindness towards each other when we can be thoughtful and intentional in our planning. And look, I know we're human, we're not going to be able to do that every week. But I have found with my husband, when we kind of talk about where we are instead of letting the resentment build, it's a game changer, because those mornings where you're so burnt out and you're just like not communicating your needs. And so there's kind of this silent treatment that's going on. You're just brushing past each other in the kitchen. We're trying to get the kids ready. We're just kind of mad. And the difference between that versus saying, babe, here's where I am this week. I mean, I have this keynote. I'm giving this big training. Hudson has baseball. We need to get Leilani here. I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I don't know how I'm going to do all this. So, what does that mean for our meals this week? Or where can we lean on some support or ask for help? Or what can we cancel? Or we're not going to be able to make that social obligation. Just that we're considering ourselves and each other in the process.
Can you give me an example? Boundary work is nervous system work where you drew a boundary and you knew it was important for you, but it was going to disappoint other people and how you did it. The inner process you went through and then how you communicated it.
Mhm. Yeah. So during that season so I still remember the moment that Garrett, my husband, called me and told me that he had an undiagnosed tumor in his neck and that it was cancer. He would need surgery and a number of post surgical treatments, as well as radiation. And I was actually on the way to a yoga class when he called me. And we got off the phone. I just start bawling hysterically. And I still keep driving to the yoga studio. I'm late. So, as you know, Tammy, sometimes with late arrivals, you never know what's going to happen. I'm pounding on the door. And the teacher graciously just kind of scoops me up, takes me in. I ended up just laying in a fetal position and crying for the entire hour. And she brought a tissue box next to my mat. And it was exactly the space holding that I needed in that moment. I was also in an incredibly busy season with my business and speaking engagements. A really prestigious university reached out to me and they were offering a lot of money for me to come and speak, do a trauma informed yoga certification for all of their clinical staff. And honestly, every part of me wanted to do it. I was so excited about the opportunity, what it meant for my business, what it meant for our family too, financially, right? Because in entrepreneurship, you just never know how things are going to go and what things are going to unfold in certain seasons. And so I had to tell them, I, I, I just can't. This season is not going to allow for me to come out and do this. And they were incredibly disappointed. I was incredibly disappointed, but my family needed me in that season. He was going to be having surgery soon. And my son was very young at the time, and it was hard, because I also was like, we could have really used the money too, but my presence was more important, and that was going to take precedent in that season. And yeah, it was hard, Tammy, I'm not going to lie, but it was the best decision for our family and where we were in that moment.
That's a gorgeous story and example. Thank you. For people listening who say, I would have said, I'll do it, I'll figure it out, and I'll get a friend to come, they would have done, for the push throughers, those of us who push through, I'm just going to push, push, push.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on for us? We're not doing that. We're saying push, 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 just push a little more. I can squeeze it in. I can do, yeah, nervous. I have my nerve. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. Oh my God, look what happened.
Mhm. That's when we end up in the emergency room with the rolling panic attacks, It is, and what's so sneaky about that is it's been said that one of the reasons burnout is so sneaky is because we're constantly borrowing from tomorrow to get through today. And when I remember that many of us are operating from this chronic rest deficit, where we're just, yeah, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. And then suddenly the body says, no, no more. I cannot continue in this way and in this capacity. And it starts showing up and oftentimes physiologically, through the stomach pains or through the migraines. I mean, our body is oftentimes the first to let us know. And so I think one of my biggest practices in my journey of healing and getting to this point of protect your energy has been to approach things from this preventative lens. Like really thinking about what does preventative self-care look like in certain seasons, because we're all really good at maybe resting once our body tells us no more. But where we oftentimes struggle is kind of building in that buffer and that margin before we're entering a busy season. So, for example, we sometimes think, okay, I'll just take the vacation or I'll take the one mental health day. But we're also worthy of forgiving ourselves for all of the times we've tried to heal our burnout with quick fixes instead of sustainable values and boundaries.
One of the quotes I pulled from Protect Your Energy is you write, we can restore our nervous system through empowered boundaries, embodied boundaries. It took years of gastrointestinal issues for me to finally realize that my lack of boundaries not only increased my anxiety, that was the connection, that a lack of boundaries can increase our anxiety, but that it also significantly impacted your physical health. I don't think people are necessarily making that connection. I mean, we hear so much about how so many people are suffering from increased anxiety at this time, but what's the connection between a lack of boundaries and high anxiety?
Mm. This has basically been my whole life, and it's exactly as you said, Tammy. I think people are not always making the physiological connection to, the cognitive of, okay, wow, I should say no, or I should do this, or and so when the pushers, as you were saying, when they keep going and keep going and keep going, and then they're getting those chronic stomach aches, or they're just always feeling ill, it's the same way that when we're working in a toxic job and we are suddenly sick every single day or constantly coming down with a cold. I mean, this is literally our immune system saying, like, what maybe we're not, you know, we need to look at this a little bit more. And actually, yogic philosophy has a lot to teach us about this because In yogic philosophy, stress and trauma actually causes something called vasanas. And vasanas are essentially emotional imprints that live in the body. They oftentimes get deep rooted or hardwired or lodged in various areas of the body, depending on the nature of what we've experienced. And when they stay there undigested, of course, this can impact our nervous system, our endocrine system, our overall physiology. It can cause things like chronic pain and other types of illness. And so I think the message here is, it sounds so cliche, listen to your body, but it really is such a powerful metaphor for life. And really recognizing that this is the first signal to making these other empowered choices in our lives. So kind of on along those lines of just thinking about the ways that our bodies can help us make empowered choices. I remember working with a survivor of domestic violence, and she was coming to my trauma informed yoga classes. And she made this intentional choice to come out of camel pose because she was uncomfortable. And while that might seem like a simple choice for some of us coming out of a shape that we're uncomfortable in, for her, it really started to become her internal voice of I have choices, I have agency, I can move my bodies in ways that are comfortable. And these kind of embodied reminders that she was getting on her mat started to ripple out with her in her life. And ultimately, she ended up leaving that abusive relationship she was in. I don't think it was because of that one moment in camel pose, but it was certainly a catalyst for her to start really recognizing that she is an anchor in her own life, that she's worthy of celebrating the choices that she has with her body. So, yeah, it's kind of so subtle, right? But I also so powerful that we can, that our language and the way that we speak to ourselves with tenderness and warmth and care, and especially with repetition over time, can really create some amazing shifts in our lives.
There's one more teaching that I pulled from the book that was an insightful moment for me. You were writing about how you were taking a self-care assessment, and one of the questions was, how often do you allow yourself to not be the one leading or in charge of something? And this was an important moment for you. And I thought for myself, when I did make the decision because my body told me, Tami, you don't have the energy to reinvent your media company right now, and it needs reinvention with all the changes that are happening. It's time for you to pass the CEO baton.
Yeah.
My body clearly stated this, and there was a whole other big thing inside me that said, no, you're the leader, you're in charge, you're the big shot on the field. That is it. That's who you are. That's how you play the game. What do you mean you're not going to be the leader? And I was like, wow, I really have to understand this need to be the leader at all costs. And that's the key part. At all costs? Really? How did you sort this out?
Wow, Tammy, that is a very powerful moment we just shared, and thank you for sharing that story. I That is so important for so many to hear who are in these scenarios where they are always the one in charge, taking the lead, the first to volunteer. And I think part of my practice recently, and something that continues to certainly be a very tender and healing spot for me, is getting more comfortable with letting some balls drop. Because I never let the balls drop, Tammy, and I'm certain that you don't either. When you are so used to the grip of doing it all and perfectionism and the default nervous system, the emotional regulator, the one that people can always count on. I mean, we just can't continue in this way at all times and at all costs, you know? And so, as challenging as it is, there are times I'll be, in a training or at my son's school and they need somebody to be in charge of that thing, that fundraiser. And when I feel that inclination to raise my hand, I'm just like, keep your hand down, keep your hand down, keep your hand down. Just getting more comfortable with letting other people step up to take the lead. And I think part of that, there's so much wrapped into that, right? Our desire, our ego, our desire for control. There's so many layers for me personally that I know I have to, practice just loosening the grip.
Your new book is called Protect Your Energy. And here in this conversation, you've talked about the importance in a preventative way to have our energy intact and available and to have, fuel, battery charge, call it whatever you want, to this sense of resource inside. And it seems like at this time when we're in, it's particularly important to have that energy available, and that particularly at this time, there are so many ways that our energy is compromised and taken from us by world events. Tell me what you think of protecting our energy specifically at this time, and we'll close on this note.
Mhm. What I would say is that oppressive systems want us burnt out because that gives them more control. And so anytime you think that you shouldn't experience joy or you shouldn't have access to being able to care for yourself because of all of the trauma and heartbreak in the world, I want you to remember that we actually need you resourced and regulated and resilient in order to continue to show up daily to fight this fight in this world. And yeah, that is just, I think, one of the most powerful tools that we can model and mirror for all those that we hold space for is tending to our own nervous system with so much care. And doing that doesn't mean that we're spiritual bypassing or that we're not feeling the heartbreak in the world. In fact, it actually makes us more tender and more our hearts more open to what's happening so we can continue to show up and be engaged.
Zabie Yamasaki, author of the new book, Protect Your Energy, A Gentle Guide to Nurture Your Nervous System, Cultivate Rest, and Honor Your Needs. As I was reading the book, I took a break, of course, at the end of each chapter and had my legs up the wall. I went out into the backyard and sat outside. And then I decided, I'm kind of tired. I think I'll go to bed early. What? And finish reading the book in the morning. And if I don't finish it, Zabi and I are going to be great because this is what she's taught. And really, the book was and is, I think, a co-regulation tool. It was for me, and it is for anybody who picks it up. And as I've said several times, the love that I can feel you would give in a yoga class or in creating your curriculum, it's on every page of the book. So thank you, Zabi. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tami. This has been the greatest honor. I loved every minute with you, and I'm truly in awe of you and all that you have built and created, and just feeling so grateful and so inspired.
Let's protect our energy, friends. Thank you, Zabie Yamasaki. Thanks, friends.